Welcome to the LoftLabs podcast. Our special guest today is Lukas Gentele. Lukas, dude, thank you for finding some time to hang out with us today.
Of course, awesome to be here, Bill.
All right, give everybody the 2-minute spiel on what you're doing today.
Yeah, I'm the CEO and one of the founders of a startup called Loft Labs. We got the vCluster open source project started in 2021. And we're essentially virtualizing the cloud native stack, starting with the centerpiece, which is Kubernetes. vCluster really allows you to spin up a whole bunch of Kubernetes clusters without having to spin up more of the heavyweight, Kubernetes clusters that you know today by essentially virtualizing them. And these virtual clusters, they are essentially just containers, and you can run them on top of another Kubernetes cluster and spin them up in seconds, dispose of them again, right? Just making it much, much more lightweight. Similar to, what a virtual machine may be to, an actual physical hardware machine. That's kind of how we see the comparison. Very heavyweight Kubernetes clusters. We're taking them, making them lightweight with virtualization.
Now, this podcast is going to be about you and your journey to get here, but I have some questions first, which always happens to me. So when I run Kubernetes on my local machine, I use a tech called Kind, Kubernetes in Docker. So I get a sense that you've done something similar, but instead of just running it locally, the idea is to run this on some cloud infrastructure that I procure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of similar when you think of Kind. Kind is an amazing tool. There's a whole bunch of others out there, right? Like Minikube, etc., right? But I think when you're thinking of Kind, obviously spinning up a container or a couple of containers that make up a Kubernetes cluster, right? That's an amazing idea. The difference of what technologies like Kind, or there's a whole bunch of others. I think Red Hat calls it hosted control plane. There's a tool called Kamaji out there, right? There's a bunch of these open source projects out there. What they do differently than vCluster does is when you spin up one of these containerized control planes, they actually need a dedicated node. Versus when you spin up a vCluster in an EKS cluster, the vCluster actually uses the nodes of the underlying cluster. So if you have a cluster with 100 nodes and 1,000 vClusters on top, these 1,000 vClusters will share the 100 nodes of the underlying cluster. Typically that wouldn't work, right? If you have just 100 nodes, there's no way you can spin up 1,000 clusters, right? You at least need, one node usually belongs to one cluster. And we're kind of making that more dynamic, essentially. That's the beauty of a virtual cluster. You can have these shared node pools in the underlying cluster.
So now that scares me a little bit, Lukas, because, okay, so when I teach Kubernetes for Go developers, just real quick, the Go, I don't know if you know much about the Go programming language, but Go allows, we use Go to build services all the time. Go has a scheduler, right, at the runtime level. And that scheduler essentially allows Go programs to run, long story short, in a sort of CPU bound mode. In other words, we only want as many threads as we have cores. And part of CPU quotas in Kubernetes is, right, not just scheduling, but to try to balance the amount of software you're running on any given node based on the number of CPUs you have. Now, what you just told me is I'm going to be running a bunch of clusters on the same hardware with that limited scope of CPU, with all the extra scheduling that's going to go on around the CPU. So I got scared only because I'm like, okay, I mean, obviously you always got to do some load testing and performance testing, but I feel like you're really going to be saturating these nodes if we're running that many Kubernetes clusters with that many services on the top of the same hardware.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, obviously pretty familiar with Golang. I mean, the whole, I think container Kubernetes ecosystem is written in Golang, and so is vCluster as well, right? So pretty familiar with the way Go works. But, the goal is really to drive up utilization of these nodes, because when you're looking at, regular, small, like 3 to 5 node EKS or GKE clusters that most companies are spinning up today, they're highly underutilized, right? So we're looking at a lot of these nodes, and it's funny when we initially start talking to companies and they're like, oh yeah, we have 200 clusters running and they have 3 nodes each. And I'm like, what do you think the utilization is of these, pre-production development and testing clusters? And we get estimates that are completely wrong. Like people are like, oh yeah, maybe 80% or 70% or something. And it's totally off. It's like 20 or 30 or, the numbers are pretty low. So really our goal is actually at the node level to drive up utilization and consolidate things into fewer nodes. But you're right. Obviously, when you are sharing nodes, there are certain quality of service boundaries you want to put in place. There are other technologies that actually need to run on the node itself, depending on what workloads you allow people to run on these nodes. We actually are working on another product that is going to run on the node level and complementary to vCluster, because we see the need for that node level isolation so great, right, that we actually need to build something ourselves. So far, we've been pointing at other technologies in the space, but we kind of realized, hey, we need to be at that node level as well to really make vCluster an awesome technology through the entire stack. So spot on, yeah, seeing that as a problem. Most of our users identified that as well.
No, I try to teach people it's okay to give your Go services most likely 10, 15% of a CPU, because it's waiting on the network most of the time anyway. It's fairly bored, right? Like that's the beautiful thing about Go is you can buy small machines with small memory and CPU footprints to start, and everybody goes crazy in the big. And I get it, right? You want to I always call it like you burn bridges at some point, right? If you put a product out there and it's just not performing. So like I sort of get it. But you're like taking it to a whole nother level here. You're just like, forget about how many Go services we're going to run on this node. We're going to run clusters, multiple clusters on this same node. But you must have monitoring at some level to give a more accurate sort of number on how, I don't know what the word is. I'm not an ops guy. I'm a software developer. I hate the ops. Lucas, I hate the offside, man. I don't want other people doing it, but how saturated I guess those machines are at some point. So, and I imagine you're not doing any sort of scheduling either, are you? Like to know we shouldn't be running anything else on this node at
No,
some
that's
point.
correct. We leave the scheduling actually up to the underlying cluster. So it kind of feels like all the containers, all the pods, right, are operated by one large cluster. The benefit of it is, really when you think of namespaces, deployments, all these higher level abstract objects in Kubernetes that are not actual, processes that have to run on a node. Those things are abstracted objects, right? And if you only have very limited access on a Kubernetes cluster, you're quite constrained, right? Like in Kubernetes, for example, when you want to deploy a lot of these Helm charts, they set up RBAC, they set up a namespace, they have CRDs, right, custom resource definitions that they deploy in your cluster. Argo is one of these examples, right? It's a very common tool, right? It has a CRD called application set, for example. So in order to install Argo, you have to have cluster-wide permissions to deploy these things to your cluster. So if you were to trivially just share a cluster without vCluster, it's going to be really difficult. Either you give everybody permissions to do whatever, right, and then it becomes a huge mess, right? So no ops person would allow that probably, and honestly, even the developers wouldn't like it, because if everybody can do whatever, then you're going to quickly find yourself in the accidental delete kind of mess, right? So, oops, I thought we didn't need this, or oh, I just upgraded this, right? So nobody can really do that model. That's kind of the anarchy world, right? The alternative is to restrict everybody really hard to what they can do in that cluster. And that really impedes their abilities to install software, right? Like, let's say, you are a team of engineers and you're supposed to deliver an application end to end, right? You want to test out things like Argo CD. If you don't have cluster-wide permissions, you can't install that piece of software. With a vCluster, you actually don't have more permissions than you would have in a regular restricted environment, right? Where you just have access to a single namespace. But these higher level objects, they're all abstracted and they are in this virtual space. So now I can install Argo, because Argo in the end is a controller, it's just a pod, right? As long as we can run that pod and abstract away all the other pieces of Argo, and wire them up correctly to that pod, you can have 10 virtual clusters and 10 Argo instances running in the same cluster, which is usually something that doesn't work. Usually you have one Argo running in one cluster, right? But that's kind of the beauty of what we allow you to do.
Yeah, we use our, yeah, for me, security is inconvenience, right? It's like, how much inconvenience do you want in your life? And I hate inconvenience. So that's another reason why I shouldn't be running any ops stuff, because I just open the damn thing up. I don't want to fight it. But it sounds like, from what you just said, is that the me as a user starts to feel unrestricted, because at the virtual level, who cares, right? Because below that one level, that's where all the restrictions are. You got to get that right though, or it doesn't matter what I try to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what we're trying to do, right? It's a balance between, operations teams that care about security and limiting users, and they're very worried about these kinds of topics: quality of service, reliability of the system, right? Making sure not everybody takes up all the resources, right? Or scheduled privileged containers that can do harmful things on the node, right? But then you have the application specific teams, right? And they have a different mindset. They, as you said, they see all of this as things that slow them down, right? They want to move fast. They're discovering something new. They want to put it in place, and they don't want to have to knock on, IT's door all the time and say like, "Can you help me do this? Because I don't have the permission to do that," right?
Oh, I hate that. Oh, I hate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's the typical scenarios, right? And so some companies resort to, instead of sharing Kubernetes and restricting everybody really hard, maybe they're very friendly to their dev teams, and they start provisioning hundreds or even thousands of clusters, right? There's a couple of companies that we work with that have 500 Kubernetes clusters, or 1,000 plus even, right? And that's kind of wild when you think about that kind of scope. And the other problem you're going to run into when you're having that scenario is you kind of want to push ops responsibility on your app teams, because you're now saying, well, you got this cluster because you're asking for this kind of freedom. Now you're going to run the Istio in there, right? And that's another thing that, application developers just, they don't like that. They're not great at that. Like, they don't
I
really
don't
know
want
the
it.
details of this, right? And that's kind of the balance you have to strike, right, between operations and more the dev and application side of things. And I think we call this tenant autonomy, right? On the one side, we want strict isolation, and we want to ensure that vCluster, doesn't exploit any of your actual, privileges and security parameters in the underlying clusters. You should be just as restricted as if you were running without a vCluster. That's the essential idea. But at the same time, on that virtual level, we give you that tenant autonomy. We kind of make you feel like your privileges are completely escalated, right?
Like I'm
And
running
that's a
locally.
beautiful thing.
Like when I'm
Yeah,
running
exactly.
kind locally, right? Just
I mean,
open
that's
up
the
some
best experience
ports.
for
Doesn't
people,
matter.
right?
You know
100%.
what? You're not solving this problem, but my biggest problem is today. I have a client called Prediction Guard, and they're basically an AI infrastructure platform. And the big thing today is, and we've built services around that running Kubernetes, right? So we use Kubernetes. But the big thing today is, and this is really interesting, I think, is that because you're putting in so much of your own data through these AI systems today, you do not really want to use the cloud. You don't want to use an environment that you don't trust, because you don't know who's actually getting that data. So everybody wants to run their own instance of this platform, and not necessarily on your own bare metal, but it could be, right? Like government wise, it might be a sneaker net in terms of getting this platform. So the bomb, like where I'm going is, my biggest problem lately has been, how do you install a Kubernetes cluster with all the services that runs in it, in this, now I guess what they call it, air gapped environment, right? Like, how do you do, like, that's a mind blowing sort of problem right there. Like in a
Yeah.
worst case scenario, somebody has a little thumb drive, right, with a binary on it, and they have to walk into the data center and plug it in and go, bah. And if you have to update one little thing, it's a new thumb drive, right? Like, this to me is a super interesting problem that's showing up because of AI right now.
Yeah. I actually have something really exciting for you. And you may not
Okay.
know this, but we just shipped a feature. It's called vCluster snapshots. And what you can do with a snapshot ultimately is you spin up a vCluster, you deploy applications to it, right? Just like a regular Kubernetes cluster. When you wanted to, back up a Kubernetes cluster, it's more like traditional backups. Usually you would use something like Velero, right? What Velero does, it goes over, each one of your Kubernetes resources, right, and dumps the YAML and things like that, right? Because that's what it can do. It doesn't have access to the underlying data store where the actuals, it doesn't have access to the etcd, right? Like EKS is not going to expose its etcd for you directly, right? But what we can do, because with vCluster, we own, the data store. So vCluster can run as lightweight as a SQLite database, right? That's in a persistent volume, or even just on a container storage if you want it totally ephemeral, right? Or it can be an external like RDS, MySQL, Postgres database, something like that, right? Can also hook up to a etcd. We have a feature called embedded etcd, for example, as well, directly baked into the vCluster and scales with the vCluster container. But what we can do with vCluster snapshots, because we own these data sources, we can take a very efficient, snapshot backup of this entire virtual cluster state, and then we put it in different data sources. It's ultimately just an OCI artifact, so you can literally push it to Docker Hub or any kind of
Mm,
registry.
mm.
And people can pull that image, import that into their own repository, into their own registries, right, behind their firewall, and then you can restore
Ooh.
that vCluster from there.
So I could
So that
create a
may actually help
base.
you.
I could create a base system using this that could get deployed, and then depending on the level of like, because some shops won't have any holes open, other ones, they can. But all right, what is this called again? I gotta send a message to Florin
It's
right now
called
while we're
vCluster
talking.
Snapshot.
Okay, hold on a second.
It's a brand new feature. It's very exciting. And,
Shot.
it obviously has a couple of smaller limitations, but we're working on making it even more complete. I think certain things, when you think about it, like you want to include like persistent volumes, for example. Persistent volumes, you may want to include them when they're small, but you may not want to include ginormous ones, right, and push them to your registry or things like that. You can obviously also put your snapshot in a S3, and it might be okay for the persistent volumes to be ginormous, right?
We've
But
been
those are
we've
the
been
kind of
playing
things.
with replicated, and I know Florin hasn't been super happy. I think he thinks it's overkill. And then we found a project called Zarf, which is my favorite word. We haven't played with it yet, but that seemed lighter weight. But I just dropped a message to Florin to take a look at vCluster snapshot, because this is a real problem today. This problem has to be solved in a way that um, you can actually right. That's the whole idea. That one binary or that one thing that you can transport around and say, okay, just install this thing. Yeah. Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
for
I'm
what it's
excited
worth,
now.
I've heard great things about both, Zarf and Replicated. I actually know the Replicated founders, have met them over the past couple of KubeCons, etc. It's not a space that we're typically operating in. That's not why we build snapshots, right? We don't have any of the bells and whistles that these guys are working on. But it happens to be a nice side effect of, this snapshot feature. We kind of saw it as you can take VM snapshots, right?
Yeah.
And then you literally have that image, right, of that virtual machine that you can reinstantiate, right, and transfer a snapshot and roll back your virtual machine state, right. Those are the kind of scenarios that we're looking at with
My,
snapshotting virtual
my
clusters.
problem is I like things simple, right? Like, so, and I don't know enough about Replicated to say anything more than I think they solved the problem and then they added so much more complexity on top that you start to wonder, like now it's doing more than I need. But I have to do all this configuration because now they've added all this stuff on top. And I'm sure that it's going to solve this problem and 100 others. But this is where you start looking at Zarf, which is like super focused on this one thing. Maybe you have to do more work. But if you solve those problems, you have a very simple solution. And I don't know if sometimes I'm wondering if I'm aging out. Like, I think the older you get, the less complicated you want stuff in general, right? Like when you're young, you want to throw like all the things I built when I was in my 20s and say even like 30s were always like I'm going to look back on it now and say it was too feature rich. It was too much for the average person to use, right? Now I'm like in the complete opposite, almost like you have to fight me to add another feature, right? Like prove to me that we need this. I don't know how well we're gonna find out now. We're gonna shift gears and find out how old you are in a second. But do you see yourself doing that too, Lucas? You start seeing yourself sort of like lean towards the less complex, less feature, like let's just focus on this and that's it.
Yeah, I think we've all seen the bell curve meme, right? With the beginners and then the experts and then the person in the middle is usually the one that overthinks it a little bit, right? No, I can definitely see that in my path as well. I think when first microservices became pretty hot and everybody was pushing microservices really heavily. That was kind of the time where you know we were kind of like at the end of college, like that time period, right? 2000, I don't know, 14, something like that, around that time, 14, 15. I think there was a big push towards microservices in a lot of companies, and in academia, we were really excited about microservices as well. And I was running a company that did contracted
Wait, don't
services.
don't tell me too much because I want to get into that. Actually,
Go ahead.
yeah, yeah, this is what's gonna happen. I'm gonna interrupt you at times. So I'm like 20 minutes in because the tech you're working on is stuff I work on. But okay,
Yeah.
we're gonna jump the time machine. So let's do this because I want to hear that story, but I want to hear it in time frame. So two questions real quick. All right. What year did you graduate high school and where were you on the planet at the time?
Yeah, you can probably spot the accent. I grew up in Germany, and I graduated high school in I think 2011. Yeah.
2011. Okay, so that gives us a general sense of like tech at the time. Okay, Germany, 2011. Now, this one I need you to free your mind. Okay, I don't want you to think too hard on this question. I want the first memory that pops in your head when you had some like that moment you first worked on a computer. Like that first time you put your hands on a keyboard and you made it do something. You were like, "Whoa!" Like that first memory. It could be anything. It could be playing a game. Anything.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I got my first computer when I was 9, but my mom always had a computer before that. She was a teacher, and there was a lot of like coursework, I guess, to prepare for the students, and printouts and those kinds of things. Very very simple, word processing kind of things. And she had a Windows 95, I think, was the first computer that was exposed to. And she did not like me touching it because obviously that was her work machine, right? And it was kind of my mom actually had she didn't like us kids being exposed to too much technology, right? She didn't want us to
Mm.
watch TV as much. We weren't allowed to have a Game Boy initially, right? Like we had to fight that battle really, really hard, and then we got like maybe an hour or two a week that we were allowed to play it. My mom was very, uh, in a way like anti-technology in that sense, right? So I was really surprised when I turned 9. She gifted me a computer, which
Wow.
was like that was a I think that was an XP already, or a
So she
2000,
got
and
a
got
new one.
upgraded
Is that what
quickly.
happened? She got a new one and she said, "Okay, you guys can break this one now."
Yeah, essentially. And it was, and she's like, you can use this, right? And she kind of wanted to, obviously, like her own, like I think she upgraded to Windows 98 in between as well, right? Like it's the operating system kind of histories, right? You're going through, but the Windows XP was the one that I really had pretty much to myself at that point. I mean, obviously there was my sister, and she wanted access to that computer as well.
Is she
She
older
wasn't quite
or
as
younger?
interested. She was younger. Yeah,
She was
she's a
younger.
year and
So
a
you
half
had
younger.
so you controlled the computer. You were older.
Yeah, pretty much. You have the admin account. Everybody else is a restricted user, right? Talking about the admin privileges and putting the guardrails in place, right? That's where it starts. Whoever signs up first is gonna
Were you
be
allowed to
the
put that
admin
in your
account.
room? Were you allowed to move that computer in your room, or it was still in a public
No, no, I was
space?
allowed to put that in my room, and that was really exciting because I could, my mom really thought that there's a lot of educational games you can play, and there's a lot of things you can do. Like for her, Game Boy was about games. The computer was important for her work, so she kind of thought, hey, let's get this kid exposed to that technology early on because it will be important. The sooner he'll be able to kind of learn it and interact with it, the better it will be for him, right? Like she saw it, like she's a teacher, right? For her, that was part of the educational program. For me as
But
a
she
kid,
didn't
I
want you
guess.
playing games on it. It seems like she
She
wanted
was
it to be
okay
looked
with
at
the
as a
learning
tool.
games, right? Like there's
Okay.
games that have a little bit of a learning effect and stuff like
Yeah,
that. She
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
want me to play like GTA and stuff like that,
Right,
right?
right,
Which
right.
obviously all of my buddies start doing when they, turned like, I don't know, 12 or whatever. I probably shouldn't say that because they're not supposed to do that at that time. But,
Of
everybody was secretly kind of playing these kind of things. And
course.
I
Of
got
course.
stuck with the learning games.
You're telling me that you didn't get a pirate copy of that and get it on that computer? Like, come on,
At
Lucas.
one point in time, I did.
Of course,
Yeah. But
the
not right at
computer
the
was in your room, right?
time.
Like, she couldn't really see that. I asked if it was private because she couldn't really see what you're like. Okay, when I was a kid, I graduated high school in '87. I'm like a kid from the '70s, and my parents, the bedroom doors always had to be open. We were not allowed to have a bedroom door closed. In fact, to the point where my dad cut all the doors in half. So the bottom could stay closed. That locked us in the room, but the top would stay open so she could see what we were doing in there.
Wow.
Right? Um, yeah, yeah, 70s, man. So, like, so the moment she lets that computer go into your room, outside of the fact that maybe you got to keep doors open, like at some point, right, you start to do things you're not supposed to do, and you're looking over your back, but it's got to happen, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, especially once the more kind of internet age starts, right? That's when you really like, oh, it's so easy to download something, and it's yeah, that's a different kind of world. But I
Yeah, I
think
mean, you got that computer before like '96. I mean, you had the ability to get on the internet. Did your mom have a modem at the time too when she was using it for school?
well, that's a good question. I think at the end of the 90s was the first time she had like one of these dial-in modems, yeah,
Yeah.
or around 2000, yeah, like it was super slow, of course, right? But that's kind of how
No,
it
but there
started.
wasn't much to download other than, I mean, web pages were just starting to get fun. But
Here at Ardan Labs, we believe in empowering companies to reach their full potential through innovative technology solutions. Trusted by small startups and Fortune 500 companies alike, we specialize in high-performance software consulting, training, staffing, development, and now AI. With over 14 years of experience, Ardan Labs has trained over 30,000 engineers and served over 1,000 companies worldwide. Whether you're mastering Go, Rust, Kubernetes, Terraform, or blockchain, we're your strategic partner for performance-grade solutions. Let's elevate your tech journey together. Reach out to Ardan Labs today.
were you at any time prior, let's say just pre-high school at this point, since you got it pre-high school, you were mainly using it to what, play games, and you learned how to do some administration on it, but you weren't doing any programming yet, were you? Visual
No, I think
Basic or
that
anything like
started really early in high school. I think it starts a little bit with you want to customize something, right? And you're kind of like, how can I do that? And then you Google, and you end up at one of these boards or something like that, right?
that? Mm.
Someone recommends, hey, just do this, right? And you're like, okay, you pull up the terminal and you just copy whatever they said you should be
Then
doing.
download this binary and run it. You'll be fine.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know what I did back then, but it probably it wasn't very, security aware or diligent in any kind of way, right? But yeah, and it's mostly silly things around like how can you customize this, or how can you have your background change every day or something like that, right? It's kind of, yeah, wild things. And I really started learning to program when, back then, I guess the early days of the internet, it was really popular for people to have their own little homepage and have a guest book and things like that, right? So I signed up for one of these tools where you could do that with, right? Like just clicky button, right? You don't really program anything. But then all of these systems have limitations, and you're kind of like, I wish I could do this with it, right? And then you're seeing things like JavaScript, and you're seeing things like HTML, because each one of these things had like a, hey, insert this before body or something like that, right? And that's a way to kind of hack the system a little bit. Um, And if you had the cooler looking homepage, that was just nice, right? So I think that's how I got into it. And I learned the first programming language I really started grasping pretty deeply was actually PHP. I think that was
I
pretty
knew
hot
you
at
were
the
going to
time,
say
right?
PHP. Your
Yeah.
generation, the PHP was how you hacked and did a lot more on the web at the time.
Yeah,
So
100%.
there's dude, I was teaching a Go class one time to these PHP developers, and they were the smartest group I had ever trained in my life at this point. And I started with basic. I was, way before. In fact, I never coded in PHP at all. I always looked at it as a scripting language. And so I'm in a classroom filled with some of the most brilliant people that I've ever met programming wise. They're getting the concepts like this. So I can't, after 3 days, I'm like, okay, you have to tell me, how do you guys know all this super low level technical stuff? You're PHP developers. And they said one thing to me, Lukas. Have you ever tried to install a PHP application? And I just started laughing. I was like, okay, you win.
Yeah, there's some kind of truth to that. Yeah, you always have to wire it up to the web server and do these kinds of things, right? Yeah, it's really not a easily packageable kind of thing. I think they built something later on, but it really wasn't the primary intent. It was that scalable web language, right? And it probably did a good job at that. I mean, Facebook built their own flavor of it, right? And I remember that coming out and being fascinated about it, and it's so much faster and everything, right? I think it was called Hack. It's probably still running
Yeah.
at Facebook.
I missed the PHP revolution. At that point, I was already coding in like C, C++, and like I kind of missed it. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a stepping stone sort of language for so many people.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
At that and
So
JavaScript, but JavaScript wasn't very powerful at that time, right? There's barely anything you could do in Internet Explorer 6.
no, and I learned a hard lesson in 2004 with JavaScript because I was always a backend developer, and I decided to build my first sort of um, website with maps and everything in 2004. And I was on Windows. I did everything with IE. And then the day that I published it, all these people using Firefox and Safari said they couldn't run the site. And I went, "What are you talking about?" And that's when I learned that JavaScript wasn't JavaScript. Like that concept blew my mind because I've coded in C. I could run C, right? Like,
Right.
and now there's all these flavors, and my brain went, "Oh my god, I'm in so much trouble." I just spent like a year developing this, and it's only going to run on IE.
Yeah, that
Sucked.
that was a very horrible time where you had to optimize for like Opera and all these other browsers, right? There were so many browsers around, and they were all so heterogeneous, right? How they interpreted CSS even was like different, right? And I
It's
mean, it's just
horrible.
kind of wild.
It's horrible. But that's when jQuery saved me. jQuery had just come out or something, and it saved me. If it wasn't for that, I not that the company lasted more than 4 years, but I would have been dead like day one. If it
Yeah.
wasn't for that. So tell me about high school. Okay, so those 4 years are really formative. It's right. You tend to graduate around 17, 18. Since your mom was throwing you out of the house every day, I imagine that you were interested in sports or like what else were you doing in high school other than some tech?
Yeah, I played chess and table tennis. Obviously, a little bit of soccer, right? As in the earlier stages of high school. And yeah, we actually played American flag football with my friends, which is kind of
Wow,
an
that's
oddity
cool.
in Germany, right? So
Yeah.
when towards the end of high school, one of my close friends, he did a exchange semester. And he was in the States, and he came back with flag football, and was really kind of getting all of us into that. So that's kind of the sports side of things. But I was really into table tennis, and yeah, that was really the passion.
Dude, I thought I was good at table tennis until I, I could hold my own in high school. Okay. I wasn't ever going to be in the Olympics, but I felt pretty confident that I could, if I was going to lose, it was going to be a close game. And then I became friends with Ryan Karp, who was a professional pitcher in the MLB, professional pitcher. He had retired already, and he had a table in his house, and I was like, "Come on, man, let's play." And he goes, "Bill, you don't want to play me." I go, "Dude, come on, I can hold my own." Oh my God, dude. I had never, if I got 2 points on him in a game, it was like victory. These guys, super athletic guys, right? They make the professionals like in any sport. That's what they would do in the clubhouse in between breaks and games. They play
Oh, I see.
table
Yeah.
tennis, like, but you're already dealing with somebody who's almost superhuman in terms of athleticism, right? Oh my God, I never picked up the paddle again after it was so humbling, man, to see somebody at that level play.
Yeah, I can see that.
Have you ever played anybody that was at that? Or maybe you were. Maybe you're the guy that at that level too. I don't know.
No, no, I wasn't. I was admittedly I wasn't that great at it, but I did play it in a club, and we went on competitions and all that kind of stuff, and I definitely got beaten down by quite some some folks that actually went on to make this their career probably, and yeah, for me it was a hobby. It was a lot of fun, right? These tournaments were a lot of fun too, but they were definitely frustrating at times when you met folks that were I played table tennis like maybe 3 times a week for an hour or something like that, and then on the weekends for these competitions. But there were people there that played it like 3 hours a day, right? That's a different level, and they knew all the tricks and kind of spins on each side, right? Yeah, that's kind of wild.
It was amazing. Like when you meet people at that level. Like I played a lot of sports when I was a kid, but I was up until maybe my first year in college. I think I was 5 foot tall. I was probably 110 pounds wet, right? And I played. I hung out with everybody. I could play anything. I didn't care. But when you meet people like that are just that elite, I played basketball against guys that were like that elite, and you're just like, oh my God, man, it's just mind blowing. It's
Yeah,
mind
basketball
blowing.
is a tough one for me. I'm pretty sure it's not gonna have any chance most of the time.
So then, remind me how the education system works in Germany. When you're near the end, I'm going to say this wrong, so just correct. Do you have to end up? Do you take a test to sort of get placement at the next level? I can't remember how it works. We've had some guests from Germany. I just can't remember.
Yeah, we have a pretty odd education system, and it has changed quite a bit even since I graduated. Yeah, when I was a kid, it's a little bit of a cruel system in a way because after fourth grade, you get separated in there's 3 tracks, right? There's the gymnasium, which is the track that I went on, which sets you up to go to college and stuff like that, and you go to 12th grade, right?
They decide in fourth grade whether or not you're going to college.
It's kind of
Man,
crazy. Yeah, that's what I'm
what
saying.
that?
It's a little cruel because like you go 4 years to college to primary school, and then there's a decision of like, okay, what's your next level, right? And that you can go in that middle track, and then I think you go to ninth grade, and then there's the other schools where you go only till eighth grade, and then you graduate. But it's really set up in fourth grade, and I think they've made this more transparent now, where you can. I think the two lower kind of tiers they merge them together, and there's flexibility now. I think after seventh or eighth grade or so to kind of like switch the lane, right? But when I
Well,
was
you're
in
not
school, that
mature
wasn't a
enough.
thing.
I was never
Yeah.
mature in high school anyway. I mean, forget about fourth grade.
No, it's kind of wild. Yeah, it's
Yeah, it
kind of
is
wild.
wild.
Yeah,
Wow.
I think Germany was very yeah, it was a little bit backwards, I guess, with that kind of system, like integrating different kind of people and understanding people, evolve at different ages potentially, right? Like your educational development doesn't always kick in when you're like 7 or something like that, right? It
Right.
just doesn't work
Right.
like
Right.
that for everybody the same way. But the schooling system kind of was designed like that, and yeah, hopefully it's better today. I think they made quite some changes. Obviously, still seeing a little bit of these changes because my mom, is still a teacher. She's close to retirement though. But, yeah, I think there have been quite some changes. And yeah, when you're on the track to go to college, there's this we call it Abitur, which is the kind of final big test. You take it in different subjects. It's not as standardized as it is like the SAT or something like that in the United States, right? Um, I think those tests are really standardized, but in Germany it's standardized per region. So you have like 16 states, and I think each state kind of standardizes it. But I was from one of the smallest states, or the smallest state in Germany. So what did that standardization really mean, right, across the greater scheme of things? And Germany ain't that big of a country in the first place, right? So yeah, but you take that test, you pick a couple of subjects as your primary and secondary, right? And then you have one oral exam. Yeah, that's kind of how it works. And
So
that
what
really
subjects did you pick for that? Do you
Oh, that's a
remember?
good question. Thinking back, I remember I really liked physics, so I picked physics for the oral exam, and I was the only one who did that,
I know. I'm
which
thinking
was
like,
kind of wild.
dude, like, does that help you? Is there like a difficulty score like they have in gymnastics now
No,
attached
it's
to
all the
whatever?
same. Like some people took like music or art and stuff like that, right? I took physics. That was a little rough.
Were you trying to sabotage it so you wouldn't go to college? I want to sabotage this. I want to talk about physics.
No, I was just really excited about. I really liked the physics teacher we had,
That's
and
cool.
he was a little shocked when I actually put in physics because he didn't expect nobody ever picks physics so, about this kind of stuff. And then he reached out to me and said, like, I saw you picked physics. That's a bad idea because we're totally behind schedule, and we won't be able to cover this one topic, which is supposed to be like 3 months. We don't have time for it. And I had no idea we were behind schedule. Right, that's when he told me,
Uh,
but there's an external person coming in who asks you questions. So it's not my teacher who's testing me, right? It's the external person
oh, I
coming
thought your
in.
teacher would do it. That way you had some.
No, they just sit in, right? Like it's part of the, non-biased kind of thing. They switch schools and stuff like
Was
that,
it too
right?
late to switch, or you were like, screw it,
No, it
we're
was too
doing it?
late to switch. And then he was like, "Yeah, but I can give you all the material and all the help, and like we can meet on a Saturday." And he was really like committed to making it work. And that topic, that very last topic, was actually really rough one because it was nuclear physics, right? So it's like all these atomic reactions. It's almost like chemistry as well, which is not a subject I really liked as much.
Oh my
So
God.
that
Did you
was pretty
pass?
tough.
You got through it? You passed?
Yeah, I got through it. Yeah, I actually got a pretty decent grade. I got two questions about the nuclear physics piece as well, and I mean I've forgotten everything by now, but
Maybe the teacher, I bet you the teacher felt bad that you were behind. And so he just said, I gotta,
yeah, he just didn't expect anybody would pick physics.
yeah, yeah.
But he
Then
was
he
a
was
great teacher
cursing you.
because he was committed to make it work, right? He's like, you pick this, I'm gonna help you get a good grade. Right?
Yeah, but the whole
Here's what we're
time
gonna
he's
do.
like, he's saying your name in vain under his breath. Damn it, Lucas, why are you doing this, man? I was gonna have some nice time off. Now I gotta teach you on Saturday.
Yeah, exactly. He was a kind of chill guy. He always did Tai Chi, and he was very much into East Asian culture and all of this. Yeah, he was a pretty chill
I,
guy.
I
Fascinating.
imagine you get brownie points for passing physics over somebody else taking us. Don't you think? Like, even
I
if it's
don't I
not
don't not sure if the
bad.
colleges care, but definitely got brownie points with that teacher.
All right, so you pass all these exams, you're going to uni, right? At that point, you get, oh, they tell you what university you're going to, or you still get to choose?
No, you get to choose. You apply with your grades and any kind of experience you may have had. And yeah, it's a little bit different here in the US. In the US, I think the extracurricular activities and what kind of cover letter you're writing, these kind of essays that matters a lot. And in Germany, it's really about like what are your grades, and everything else is a nice plus, and we weight maybe 5% or something like that. But in the end, it's really about the grades you have, and yeah, in that last final year of high school. I think it's the final 2 years. I think it's kind of weighed. I think 60% or so are the grades you make over the past 2 years, and 40% is that final exam in these different subjects.
I think the problem in the US is the competition. It's like they're going to get 5,000, 8,000 sort of applicants, and a majority of them have the same GPA, right? Because my stepdaughter right now, who's 17, is going through this whole process, right? I'm watching her go through, and I had 5 kids before her, and but she's trying to get into like the big schools, okay, the Columbia and the Stanfords and the MITs and
Yeah.
she's trying to get into those schools, and she's doing well, but I think it's the level of competition that they need something other than the grades to sort of look at you, just because there's so many kids applying.
Yeah, I could see that. But I mean, to be fair, it also makes a lot of sense because you probably really want more of a holistic kind of person rather than just, I mean, some people are really good at taking tests and others are not so good at taking tests, right? And so if you're weighing that with pretty much 100% like they do in Germany, you're really putting some people at a disadvantage that may actually be they may be great in that profession that they're in that profession that they're trying to get a degree in, right? They just may never get there because they're not great at taking particular tests, right? So yeah, it's a
Well,
little bit of both.
I kind of told her, like, if you're applying to MIT, my guess is that they're really looking at grades and how heads down are you going to be academically, right? As opposed to you're looking at Columbia, which is much more around a more overall, I don't say liberal studies, but right, like a more well-rounded sort of
Yeah.
education. I know I don't know much about MIT other than it's a premier engineering school. So I imagine you're accepting kids that really want to focus 80 hours a week on engineering.
Yeah, probably.
So where did you end up going? And where
I
did you
went
end
to the
up
University of
deciding?
Mannheim. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because, I had good grades and everything, and I didn't really spend too much time thinking about which college and stuff like that. And I know a lot of people were really obsessed with that in these like last 2 years of high school. And I was more like, okay, let me finish this and then let's see what I do next, right? And I obviously had this passion for software development and was building kind of things. And yeah, one of my friends, he ended up applying for a University of Mannheim, which was known to be like the best business school in Germany. And so that's how I kind of started looking into it. And obviously looked at a bunch of other schools, and I didn't know exactly, do I want to do computer science, or do I want to do something else, right? Um, and I
What was your mom telling you at the time? I'm super curious. Was she one of these people that just said, just follow your heart and do what you want? Or, no, Lucas, this is the track. I want you to do this.
No, I think she was very very open for me to make a decision. I think probably if I would have told her art, she would have maybe questioned that a little bit more because my art skills were not great, right? Um, but no, I think she obviously if the for me like computer science was definitely up there, right? And if that's one of the contenders, then I don't think any parent is gonna be too skeptical of your choices, right?
I
But
just find it odd that you went physics on this exam and then you're not going to do something around science or
I
engineering.
thought
That would
about it. I
be
did think about that. Yeah,
that would be odd, wouldn't it?
yeah, it's true. I thought about studying math or physics, but I looked into math and I don't know, that was just kind of really, that sounded really, really rough, right? And I also didn't really know what I'm going to do with that. And, and I looked into like, okay, what are the jobs that people do? And it's kind of like insurance analyst and like these kinds of things, right? Where I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound great, right? It's like I'm interested in math, but like, do I want to calculate people's life insurance, kind of like
Yeah,
probabilities and
actuary
stuff like
tables,
that?
so I can. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
You
that
could have
didn't
became
sound
a
like
bookie
fun.
though, man. You could have became a bookie. Like,
Yeah, that would have been a path. No, I mean I saw this degree, and I was always entrepreneurial. I started my first business when I was about 16, and so I was looking for something where where I could kind of combine the two passions of like, okay, I want to build something myself, and not just like on the technical level, but also this entrepreneurial spirit of like I want to really do something, right?
give me 2 minutes on this business you started at 16.
Yeah, that's kind of wild. So as I said, I started with like building the home pages and stuff like that, right? I started for myself, obviously, and when I was 12 or 13 in high school, the school website was really crappy, right? And it was 10 years old, and it was like iframes and stuff like it was
Yeah,
like no, I think it was like frames. It was split up. The navigation was a frame, the header was a frame, the body was a frame, right? And different HTML pages were loading. It was a nightmare, right? And so I saw that, and I spoke to, and I saw at the footer of the page, it actually had the name that had it was the last name of one of my best friends at the time, and I asked him, hey, is this your dad or like from your family? And he's like, yeah, it's my older brother. He's like 9 years older or something like that. And he went to that same school and he built that homepage when he was there. It was the first homepage the school ever had, right? And so I spoke to him, and then he's like, "Yeah, I mean, just like redo it, right? Like, just reach out to them and tell them like, hey, I can do this better. How about I'll do this for you guys." So that's what I did. So I rebuilt the homepage for the school, and then a whole bunch of parents, kind of saw that update, and obviously were interested in like, oh,
Nice.
maybe I could get a nice homepage for like local lawyers or dentists or
Yeah, yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
right?
yeah. What were
So
you
they just
charging to do a what were you charging for
Oh my
a high
gosh,
page
nothing, right?
website?
It's like $100, $200, right? It was just kind of like, okay, let's just crank this
I
out
know,
in a
but at
couple of
your
days.
age, that's a lot of money, dude. That's a
Yeah, that
lot
was
of money.
great. I mean, it was awesome for
Hundred
me.
bucks
That's how I got
at
hooked
13?
in, being an entrepreneur.
Oh man. Did your mom help you with like the invoicing, or you just like said, here? Like it was really relaxed, right?
Yeah, that was kind of part of it because, I mean, my mom had to a little bit finance my, web hosting expenses and stuff like that. Let's call it like that. I had to convince her every time, I wanted to do something. And at one point, I bought this dedicated server and I was running mail servers, and that's just because I got curious in that
Really?
kind
You
of
got to a
direction.
point where you were doing everything but running your own modems. You almost became an ISP, Lucas.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, I did that later though, right after college. I actually plugged in physical servers in a co-located data center, that kind of stuff. I went like really deep in the
Well,
ops journey, I
so
guess.
that carried you. Okay, okay. So let's talk about that. So wow. So you took over the website that started generating business to do other websites and email. And so you're making some decent for your age, you're making some decent money, but now you got to go to university, right? That's dedicated. But you didn't so that's was that business still running
Yeah,
to
yeah,
support
it was
university?
still running. It's actually quite funny because in Germany you can't start a business until you are 18. So initially, what I was doing, I guess, wasn't quite legal in
Uh,
the first couple of
well, it
times,
could have
and
been registered under your mom's name, right? Like,
exactly, it could have been, yeah. So it was kind of funny because one of the alumni of the high school also started a new homepage. He had a marketing agency. I got in touch with him, and he studied law, and then became on to study this, create this marketing agency. I think his wife was more the creative one, and he was more the, hey, let's get the books in order and the contracts and whatnot. And
yeah.
he reached out and said like, hey, we do everything, corporate identities and signs and brochures and what we don't do websites. How about we partner and we funnel our clients to you? And I'm like, that sounds amazing.
Right.
So,
What the heck?
but this guy studied law, and he was like, well, but in order for this to be all in order, I need you to, because I can't employ you because you're underage, right?
Mm,
So you need to start your own business. And because he was a lawyer, effectively, he's like, I'm going to tell you how to do it and walk you through the process. And you kind of open a court case on yourself, and you create a business plan, and
my
you present
God.
it in front of a judge, right? And
Really?
then they kind of, yeah, and because my mom was employed by the state, it wasn't so easy for her to create a business as well, right? Otherwise that would have been a way out. um,
Wow.
but yeah, it was kind of tricky, and it took about 9 months or so. And then the state of Saarland, where I'm from in Germany, ruled that I should be treated like an adult of 16 or so. So this whole thing started with 15, and with 16 I was allowed to, I was legally treated like an adult. They were like, hey, if you mess up with this business, we're going to put you in prison like an adult as well, right? That's kind of what the judge
Oh
said to
man.
me. But here you go, here's your documents.
So you had to wait 9 months to work with this marketing firm.
I
You couldn't
did,
work
yeah.
under the
I
table.
mean, they already kind of lined things up, and I already worked on some websites, right? It was, but then, the
So
first
okay, so
invoice could be sent at that.
the state gave you the business at 16 essentially.
Yeah, the permission to do it. And then I could open a bank account and all that kind of stuff for the business, and everybody, I walked into that bank and said, like, I want to open a bank account for my business. And they were like, get the hell out of here.
Were you both like excited and nervous at the same time? Because that's like scary. Suddenly somebody's like, okay, Be an adult.
Yeah, it was a little
Okay.
scary. My mom was like, "You know what you're doing, right?" Because she didn't want me to get in trouble, right? And my sister was like, "What the hell are you doing?" It's-
That's amazing though, dude. I'm
yeah,
sure they
it's
didn't hand those
funny.
out willy-nilly. You were able to prove. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was a long process, right? It was very annoying. The court system is obviously not fun in any case, although, I kind of put it on myself in a way, but
That's an
yeah,
education in and of itself right there.
it kind of is, yeah.
So now you have your own business at 16 and now you're going into university, but there's no reason to shut that business down, right? Like you're
No, I kept it
still rolling.
running and I just kind of changed the direction a little bit. So the more I learned, so I met a lot of good people in college, obviously brilliant folks in the computer science classes, right? I did a degree and I was really excited. I found this degree that's a mix between computer science and business. It's called Management of Information Systems. And you have some really fundamental, algorithms and data structures classes, right? You have some hands-on programming classes, but then you also learn how to manage engineering teams and do product management and all the kind of business side of this, which is really helpful as somebody who is running a small single person business and who's thinking about expanding this, right? So I met a bunch of talented folks and I started hiring them. I'm just kind of
Now
like,
it's
hey,
scary,
I
dude.
can pay you $400 if you work on the side with me on some of these projects, right? And
But
you could
you didn't
work.
make them official employees, right? Because in Europe, the labor laws are really
No, no, no. It's really
they're just
like,
like contractor to contractor sort of
yeah, yeah,
things.
exactly. It's this
Yeah.
kind of when you're a student, there's like specific kind of student employment stuff where you work for like, it's pretty much like a tax-free under like 1K or something like that. You can work a little and yeah, so I started working with a bunch of my friends on like really cool projects, and we got obviously deeper into more exciting stuff than just websites, and started building online shops, and then we built an e-learning platform for a startup, that wanted to
Well, how are you
get
doing
in
that
that
and going to
space.
school? At some point, did you just say, I don't need school or I'm already where I'm at?
Yeah, it's kind of a side projects. The cool thing about, college in Germany in a way is that you don't have to show up until the finals. It's very different than
Mm.
like in the US. There's a lot of like quizzes and tests and attendance and stuff. In Germany, most of the professors, I would say like almost all of them, there may be like one or two professors who really wanted everybody to always be there, and they never shared and uploaded any notes and that kind of stuff, right? But most of the lecture material is just uploaded as PDF, and the videos are uploaded of the lecture, right? And you just have to come to the final exam, really. So
And you knew when the exam was. It wasn't like,
exactly, you knew when the exam
yeah.
was, and you knew to probably show up to like 2 or 3 times before the exam because that's when the professors may have spilled like certain topics that would come up, right? But yeah, I skipped out on a lot of classes.
So
I probably went to
you
like
had
less
enough
than
free time to
50%.
do it. I see.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
That's a great thing around college, right? Like you get some free time to do other things.
I know when I went to university, I had the same thing. I had some teachers, the bigger the class, the less the teacher could even, they didn't care about attendance, right? Like I rarely went to those classes. I got notes from but the scary thing, at least in the US at the time, and I went to school in the early 90s, was you didn't know if there was going to be an exam that day. Like
Oh, I see.
it wasn't published. So I was really relying on friends to like tell me the truth about what they heard in class in terms of no, Bill, you got to be in class on Tuesday because right they're gonna do this thing. Um, but that's kind of cool because you got to continue to grow a business while getting your degree. How long does it take you to get your degree in Germany? Is that a 4 year program?
Yeah, we have 3-year bachelors and 2-year masters typically. I mean, some degrees are different, but that's pretty much the average.
So you graduated high school in 2011, you said. So then for those 5 years, it's like 2016. At this point, right? I'm assuming you graduated with the the 2 degrees, but you have a fully functioning, flourishing business.
Yeah, it was pretty exciting. Obviously, everybody who was working with me wanted to now get a real job. So, that was obviously a certain problem that you think of when you're getting towards the end of this. And then there was this opportunity. I was pretty involved. So I had a little bit of a side job at the chair of artificial intelligence because I thought that
So
was
on
like
top of your business and university, you had the side job you ran through this company, I imagine.
No, I actually just kind of worked regular with them because it was really easy. They just gave me some, specific work that, like one doctoral student was working on something with graph databases and knowledge databases and stuff like that. And that's something I'd never dealt with, right? I just kind of randomly kind of got into meeting the professor, and he's like, you know what, you should really talk to this, one of my doctorate degree folks, because this could be interesting for you. It just kind of started like that, and it wasn't a pretty extensive. I think the student contract, I think is what it's called. They put me in was like 10 hours a month or something like that. So it wasn't really a lot of work, but it was another thing to just learn and kind of get into. Yeah, obviously made a little bit of money as well, which is exciting. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Did you have
And
any social time during those 5 years? Did you go to any parties? Did you tell me
no,
that
I
you
went to
had
some
some way to
parties for
socialize?
sure. But
Okay.
yeah, I
Because
quit
I
the
get
table tennis. That
nervous
freed
when
up
I
some
hear these
time.
when I hear these sorts of stories, I get nervous because I understand that you're there for the academics and you're there to learn, but and maybe this is a US thing, and I try to tell the 17-year-old, right? I try to tell her that there's a balance here of yes, go to university and study and learn and prepare, get yourself in a position for whatever you want to do in life, but it's also a moment of social interactions and that aspect, right? Like you got a great personality. We're talking for over an hour, and especially from a business perspective, you need that, right? But you don't learn that even in high school so much. Like college, you sort of learn that. But did
Yeah.
you did you have a weekend? Did you have n number of hours a week to
Oh,
do
absolutely.
some?
Yeah, as I said,
Okay,
it helps a lot if you only go to like 50% of the classes, right? That gives you like 2.5 days a week to just do this kind of stuff, right? And no, I think to be honest, for me, finals were always very stressful. So I didn't do anything else for like 2 or 3 weeks because I had to just catch up what happened throughout the semester, right?
that's
So that was
fair.
kind of rough, but yeah, I think there was a lot of free time. Like in retrospect, like I wish I could go back and be a student and just kind of run the side hustles, right? That I had, right? That was it's obviously a lot more responsibility and a lot more stressful now to run an actual startup venture fund to have lots of like full-time employees and responsibilities and customers depending on your product, right? Back then it was like, okay, we did a one-off thing, we delivered it, right? It was like we didn't have to deal with that messy microservice application anymore after it got handed over. That's why I said like we got really deep into microservices, and some of these things would have been way easier but as a monolith, to be honest.
But you're making good money too. I mean, for your age, again, money. I was going to ask you about dorming. Like, when you go to university, they give you a place to live, or you had to pay rent for a flat.
Yeah, no, I rented a flat. I think I actually met this. So I went apartment hunting in that city. That was always a thing, right? Like you're gonna be studying there next month or whatever. So you go there for like 2 or 3 days, and you just kind of see a whole bunch of flats in a row. There's obviously the housing from the university as well, but I've just heard bad things around, like it's very loud and like there's parties all the time, and like it's just better to pop in for the party and then be able to
Wait,
get
yeah.
some good night's sleep in your own place. And obviously a lot of people share a flat as well, right, in the city. And I was looking around. I was open to doing that as well. But I met this at one of the apartments. I met this really, really old guy. I mean, he's like, I don't know, it's almost 90 or something like that. And the apartment was kind of wild because in Germany, like most people don't know this. That's a crazy story. But like apartments in Germany, like half of them come without a kitchen. You have to bring your own kitchen. There's literally people in Germany that move from apartment to apartment and they take their kitchen out, and just like a
When
piece of
you say
furniture.
kitchen, you mean more than just the stove, like sink
Yeah,
and
I mean the
stuff?
whole thing, right? Like the
Cabinets?
countertops and the cabinet. It's crazy.
What?
It's really crazy. Yeah. So my mom moved a couple of times when I was a kid or like when I was like, a teen, and I know how to build up a kitchen because my mom. So there's two groups in Germany. There's the 50% of people that have a kitchen and move to places where there's no kitchen in the apartment, and then there's 50% of people that rent apartments with kitchens, right? And that's the much smaller group. Like obviously in the US, that's the only thing you can do. Cause I don't think it's even legal to rent out a
In
place
the
without-
US, the thing now is they're renting apartments without washing and dryers that you have to buy your own. Like this just started to happen recently. And I'm like, you got to be. So my daughter
Yeah,
needed an
that's
apartment. I'm
annoying
like,
too.
yeah, it's annoying. I'm like, you're picking an apartment that has the washer and dryer in it already. And I
Yeah,
found that insane. I can't imagine that you have to go and I mean, who says you have the same space for the cabinets anyway? I mean,
yeah, it's kind of wild. It's really
that's
crazy. I
wild.
never understood why we do that, but he had one of these tiny places, right? I met him, and it was really run down. Like the floor had a little bit of a hole in it, and you could see like older flooring below it. And I looked at this place and I was like, I could really turn this into something, but it's bad right now. It's such in a bad state. He hasn't done anything. He's like almost 90, right? Like he just and he, I spoke to him and he's like, yeah, I just want somebody to take good care of it. And I was like, take good care of it. And then I told him, so how much do you want for it? It was really cheap. It was like $200 or something like that. It was an incredible deal compared to everything else. It was like, maybe
Yeah.
700, something like that, right? For a solo apartment. It was obviously small, right? But I told him, if I agree to move in here, can I do whatever I want? Like, can I rip out the floor and just put new flooring in, right? And he's like, yeah, of course, do whatever you want. And I was like, that kind of makes sense because it looks wild, right?
You can't
Um,
make it any worse.
yeah, exactly. I really renovated that place in a couple months. But then I had my own place for incredibly cheap, right? And the old man really didn't care. He never raised the rent, and I lived there for like 8 years or something like
Oh
that.
my God. I was
It
saying
was a
that you were
good
just
deal.
going to buy it from him.
Yeah, that would have been a good idea. I wasn't smart enough to to propose that,
He
to be
probably would have
honest.
sold it to you. I mean, he needed a place to, well, I guess he wasn't living there, right? So,
No, no, he
yeah.
wasn't. He owned the whole apartment building, right? There was a whole bunch of other apartments, and there was a lot of them were really nice. He just really didn't care about the. I think there were three apartments that were super small, student type, and he didn't care about them at all.
See, there your entrepreneurial should have kicked in and you should have said, I'm
That
going
is
to
true.
renovate all of these and we're going to share the rent in them since you could do
Yep.
that. Then you could have gotten like $800 a month.
Yeah, but you learn how to build some
Yeah, no, I
flooring and
can't
put
do
a
that.
kitchen in and stuff like
That's wild, dude.
that.
When he saw the apartment after, was he, what, do you remember? Like
Oh yeah, yeah, he
when you
liked
were
it.
done?
He came by, I think, like a year in or something. Obviously to sign a new lease and stuff like that. And I think there was something. Oh no, I think a water boiler or something like that. That was something I didn't touch, right? Water and electricity. So I called him for that piece.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, he liked what I've done with the place, and yeah, I think at one point, I think after like 5 years or something, he passed away, and he passed it down to his son, um, and I think the son was pretty happy with the state that was in.
Probably knew it too. Do you have, not that I need to see them, but do you have pictures? Like that would have been
Oh,
nice if
I
you
don't
had
think I have any
maintained some
pictures of that.
pictures.
I mean, I may have pictures of the place if I go back. I did
Yeah.
rent it out at one point because
You
I went to the
subleased it.
States for a couple months and I subleased it for like a semester or so. But
That's cool.
yeah, it's a long time ago. I gotta go back
Yeah,
at
man.
my
That's
pictures.
so nice to be that handy. I'm handy enough to put up ceiling fans and fix holes and stuff, but like putting a kitchen together it's like I haven't done, but you had the experience because of the move. So okay, so look, so you're finished with your university. You had a business going. It's like 2016. You had that other side gig too with the other student. So what's your plan now? Is your plan to just grow this business that's got to be at this point what 6 years old? Like you started that business when you were 16.
Yeah. I
right?
mean, it was always a side hustle. It was never, really full time. So the scale was still pretty limited. But yeah, I mean, I hired like six, seven people or so throughout the my studies, right? I think at the peak maybe we were at 10 for a specific project or something like that. One of the people I had hired was Fabian, my now co-founder and CTO, and he was one of the most talented programmers out there. He was working for SAP on a contract when I met him, and I really wanted to convince him to work for me instead. And so he went back to his boss at, at SAP and kind of said like, hey, this friend of mine is offering you to work for them, and then SAP bumped his salary, and I was like, damn it.
Of course. And he
And
said,
so
"Thank you, Lucas. I got a raise."
yeah, exactly. So he stayed another year or something or two at SAP, and then finally he started working with me, and he had a real entrepreneurial spirit as well. Um, and when we are both nearing our degrees, our master's degrees, I still had that research kind of assistant gig, and they had there was this opportunity to get like a entrepreneurial research kind of grant, which gives you a pretty decent salary for just right after graduation. And with the grant, they essentially pay you kind of like a monthly salary almost, but instead it's just kind of a research grant for a year. And they do that so you can explore what you want to do as an entrepreneur. So you kind of have
Really?
to, file the case of like what you plan on doing and which areas you find interesting and stuff like that. And
Is this
because
a
I wasn't,
university thing or a Germany thing?
no, is a Germany. It's like a
Okay.
statewide thing.
Okay.
But the research at university are very familiar with this kind of stuff, and that's how I learned about it. And so I was glad I worked at that chair of artificial intelligence, and I think they were part of this Institute for Enterprise Systems at the University of Mannheim, and they knew a lot about entrepreneurship, and I had no clue, to be honest, because it was just kind of all like, it's not like I didn't even know what Y Combinator was at that time, to be honest. I had no idea
I,
about
I I
startups and
think you're
venture
selling
capital.
yourself short. Like you did know because you were living it since you were 16. Maybe you didn't know it formally, but
Yeah,
you
right.
kept a
It's kind of
business
like learning the
going.
program when you're 13, but you have no idea what algorithms and data structures and how databases are made up and
Yeah, yeah, but you also you're keeping a business going. It's not like you're making mistakes, but they haven't been like that costly yet.
yeah, 100%. And yeah, so I, kind of convinced him, hey, do we want to do this, right? And one of my other friends, and they say you have better chances if three people apply, right? Together, and so we did that, and yeah, we got it granted for a year.
Amazing.
And part of the grant was, and that's why I said like we got really deep into server, maintenance and architecture because part of the grant was a 30K grant that you could spend on compute. And you could either spend it on
Mm,
AWS and stuff like that, but then, everything was gone after a year, right? Or you could just buy hardware and plug it in the data center and we're like, hey, let's buy some hardware, right? That sounds really cool. So we ordered a whole bunch of servers and parts and put them together and then drove to a co-location data center. We had it just in the back of the car, right? And walked into the data center and said, like, hey, we would like to plug in
we
some
need a
hardware
cage.
here.
We need a cage. Here's some cash.
Yeah, yeah, we had these three like physical servers, and we weren't even doing virtualization. It was a bare metal, and then we ran Kubernetes on top of that, and Ceph as
What year
a
is this
distributed
that you're
data
running
store.
Kubernetes? What year
I
is
think that
this?
was 2017. Yeah, so that
Has
was like
Kubernetes been
early
around
days.
that long? Hold on. Hold on. Kubernetes official release. Hold on.
Yeah,
Has it
wasn't it
been
like
around since
15 or
2000?
16 when it started?
I'm looking it up now.
Oh no, I think
Uh,
it was 14. Isn't it 10 years Kubernetes was in 2024?
can't even find it really quickly here. But Kubernetes, I don't know, dude. I didn't realize it was around that long. I tell you that much.
Yeah, yeah. I think version one was, I think the first release was on 14 and version one may have been 1 year later or something like that. So we were pretty early with Kubernetes. I mean, I kind of ran it on some, rented, virtualized servers that I purchased. Um, yeah, with the bare metal hardware, like Kelsey Hightower wrote the Kubernetes the hardware. We
Yeah.
definitely did it the hard way, including the hardware.
So July 2015 is the
Got it, got it.
release 1.0.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess.
Oh
Yeah,
my
two
God.
years
I didn't
into the
realize you had
Kubernetes
been
journey.
around that long. Oh my God, dude, you jumped. I'm curious what you saw with Kubernetes in 2016, 17 that made you, because that's maybe it's not as risky for what you're doing, but it's always sort of risky to jump into a tech that hard. And because you don't know if it's going to, there was a lot of other things competing against it at the time.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Mesos was really big, right? Mesosphere, the company was really, and they were pushing hard, and Docker Swarm was
Docker
still a big
Swarm.
thing, right? So I looked at Docker Swarm as well, and a lot of the times back then, I think it was Mesosphere's great like content marketing and stuff. And I kind of didn't know that that was content marketing, probably, right? And they were obviously trying to shape a certain opinion in the public, right? But there were a lot of blog posts out there that were talking about Kubernetes is not like ready for prime time and not scalable enough. Not that we needed a big scale, but you always want to build like a system that scales up nicely. Like I was wondering, like, what if we plugged in like 8 more of these servers and connected it, right? And obviously, 8 is not a number that, they meant with scale. They meant like, can it handle 400 nodes, right? Instead of
Yeah. And
10.
it handled 10,000 machines, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I think
Right,
in
right,
the
right.
early days of Kubernetes, that's what it was about, right? It was like initially Kubernetes could handle a couple of nodes, and then it was 100, and then it was 500, right? And the numbers went up from there, and that's pretty fascinating. And I think I was running because this notion was out there. Kubernetes wasn't as scalable as Mesos was because it was more established. There were a lot of guides out there on how to run Mesos, and then Marathon, I think, was their long running app suite, and to run Kubernetes on top of that to make it scalable. Like I think that was a little bit of the and I
Right.
talked to a customer, a Fortune 500 bank, recently, and I cracked a joke there and said, like, stupid things we did like in the early days of Kubernetes. I actually ran Kubernetes and Mesos to make it more scalable. And they were looking at me and were like, "Oh, we did the same thing at the bank, but like obviously that was a different scale, different investment,
Yeah.
right?" And they're like, "That was a mess." And I mean, I thought it was a mess, right? It was two orchestrators on top of each other. It was awful, right?
Yeah. No, no.
But
Yeah.
yeah, fun times.
So I, what I'm trying to get at here is you got interested in this idea of being able to sort of scale software and control and manage and debug software at a, we'll call it a Google scale, right? Because Kubernetes is born out of Borg, which Google had to solve this problem. Facebook has to solve that. Like there's maybe 5 companies. Netflix has to solve that problem. But I'm always got to tell people you're not at Google scale, so slow down right
Right.
now, right? Like you don't have to solve that problem today. Um, but was that what you were interested in how you can manage um, application software data centers at a Google scale?
Yeah, I mean, I wish what you just said somebody would have told me in 2016, 17, right? But yeah, it was just fascinating kind of embark on that journey. And like the overall goal for us was really we were not just building software for these clients of ours. We also ran them a lot, right? We ran the software ultimately. And so for us, that was really okay. How can we develop it faster, run it more reliably, right? So that those were kind of the starting points. We didn't need any kind of scale, to be honest, right, for the handful of customers we were serving, but it
But
was
you were
really
running them on your
interesting
own hardware. Like you weren't using cloud at the time. You were almost developing your own cloud in a sense, right?
in a
You wanted to
sense,
use your
yeah.
own hardware.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then
So that
we
makes
kind of
sense.
got the idea of, some of our customers, for example, we worked with this one startup that built this e-learning platform. They were, obviously they wanted to make tweaks to the software themselves. So for us, the question was also, okay, how can we let them update the software and run it reliably, not just us, which is a whole different problem, right? And that's where really the intricacies of Kubernetes come in, because Kubernetes isn't the easy thing to just hand over to somebody and say like, hey, there you go, right? Here's your API. So
Well, not if
yeah,
you're trying to provide reliability in the infrastructure, right? Because they're going to break stuff, and now it's made more of a headache. Unless you've built some of your own tools on top of the Kubernetes, which is, I imagine, what you've done, just like Google and Amazon and everybody else has done at this point, right?
100%. That's how it started, right? We built an open source, and we decided to open source it. We had no clue about running open source projects at the time. I mean, we were obviously making a,
Ignorance is bliss. You could, right? Ignorance is bliss.
yeah, in a
That's how
way,
people
right?
are successful, with their ignorance.
Yeah, sometimes if you hear these entrepreneurial journeys and how people got open source projects started, and like, yeah, I think in a lot of, I think even Nvidia's founder Jensen Young was asked like, hey, would you start Nvidia again, or what would you give people as advice? And it's like, don't start a company like I did.
Ignorance, yeah.
Is kind of hilarious. But yeah, I benefited from that ignorance, I think, throughout my entire journey, as you can tell. And I think we built this developer tool for Kubernetes. That was really something we were like, okay, building stuff on Kubernetes is really hard, right? Like there's Docker Compose, which was very popular at the time, but nobody was doing, really, Swarm wasn't really the popular thing. Things were really gravitating towards Kubernetes. So we were like, how can we bring that Docker Compose experience to Kubernetes really, and have a nicer development flow, real-time updates in a container. In a way, you move your runtime into Kubernetes, but you're still coding in your local IDE. That was kind of our overarching goal. So we built this project called DevSpace. It's a CNCF project now. We contributed to CNCF, I think 2 years ago or so, after we decided, okay, we got to really focus on vCluster, and this can live as a community project, but
Is that
we,
what you worked on from like 17 to sort of
yeah, I think we open sourced it
2022?
in maybe 2018 or so. It was towards the end of that research grant phase. And, then was the next kind of decision, phase where you're like, okay, we did this research grant now. Do we all now get a job at like SAP or Google or whatever,
I
right?
was going to
Or
ask
what
you,
do we do?
why not try to get a job at Google, learn Borg at some level, learn how they're doing it, and take that knowledge, and then like that never, I guess that crossed your, like, that's where
I
my
don't
brain
know.
is at this point.
Yeah, I
Like,
think a lot of like true founders like I am, it just wasn't an option. I don't know, it wasn't something. I mean, you think about it a little bit, but you never seriously consider it, because the upside of building something from the ground on your own is just that always, it sounds like a struggle, which it definitely is at times, right? But it also is a passion. It's just inside of you, and you just kind of want to fulfill that passion, right? You just kind of want to chase after this and make it work, right? Um, so yeah, I think, when we open sourced DevSpace, and we immediately saw, that people were excited about it. I posted it on Reddit, and people kind of picked it up from there. And yeah, I think we were like, there may be an opportunity here, right? And we had no business plan, and like really thought about like how can we monetize that. We just like, okay, people seem to like this, right? And we use it, so it must be valuable, right? That was kind of like the thought of this. And I've never built a product company before, right? The difference is,
it's
when
different.
you
Yeah.
when you build a services company, you kind of like outline the statement of work, and exactly deliverable dates, and you get a certain amount of cash up front, and then the rest later, right? Like it's all very clearly defined, and then you hire, and obviously you run it in a way that you make a profit, right? But with a startup or any kind of like product focused business, it's way different. Like you invest a lot of R&D and a lot of focus on building this thing out before you make a profit. I mean, Uber didn't make a profit when they went when they IPO'd and stuff like that, right? It's kind of wild, but I didn't know any of this, right? So when we started, that was a quite different
Did you
journey. And
raise money? Because like these companies end up having to. So I tried a product company in 2004 and just didn't. We raised 5 million. It wasn't even enough, right? We bled to death slowly. That's one lesson I learned is if you're going to do that, you have to raise the right amount so
Yeah.
you're not bleeding out, right? Because now you stop spending money, so you're not right. That was one lesson. So
Yeah, yeah. I think for us really, I started looking into this stuff, right? I started Googling and I found Y Combinator and I watched their Stanford lesson on YouTube and stuff like that, right? And I really tried to educate myself on like how people build these kind of companies, right? And then and that was all incredibly helpful. And then, at the same time, there was this business plan competition in Germany where it was like, okay, let's write up a small business plan, submit it, see what we can do. Um, and I think we won that competition. And part of the prize was they said like on stage, hey, we have the surprise prize for you as well. And we're like, oh, okay. And they're like, you can apply for Berkeley Skydeck Accelerator Program. And obviously, I knew what an accelerator was at the time, but I had no idea what Berkeley Skydeck was. So I was like, thanks, I guess.
yeah, you don't know to be excited or not. Yeah.
And back then, Skydeck is trying to do the same that YC does, but in the UC Berkeley ecosystem. So, we got in touch with them, and that kind of kickstarted for us also to apply to YC. We applied for YC and then we applied there. And, YC told us, hey, come back in 6 months. We ran that final interview round, right? They flew us in and I'm like, this is insane, right? They just tell us, hey, come to California next Tuesday. We're going to reimburse you to
Let me
do
ask
this,
you one.
right?
Which product is all this for? Is this for the
This is
vCluster?
DevSpace. This is
DevSpace.
DevSpace. This is the early days, 2018, when we open
Okay.
sourced it, I think. And yeah, we went to California and we're like, we have a shot with this in Silicon Valley. That's crazy, right? Like we went
Yeah.
from like the services business and just graduating and this kind of stuff to like, okay, Y Combinator wants to talk to us. Those are the people that made Airbnb big, like it was kind of like this for us, right? Um, and yeah, but they told us, hey, come back in 6 months. You still have a lot of things to iron out, right? And Skydeck was really smart because Skydeck realized we were super early and a little bit naive and a little bit more like researchy than, we were just a little bit less of the Stanford Business School grad and, folks that actually know what they're doing with a startup. But Skydeck saw the potential, and they were like, "Well, if YC told you to come back in 6 months, we would take you now." you know? That was kind of funny, and so yeah, we just
Did you have to move to California for that?
yeah, we packed our things and moved to Berkeley.
Wow.
Yeah,
How
and
much
that was
money?
kind of
How much money they give you? Like, I don't imagine they give you a lot of money to just
yeah, it's
jump up
more
and
now. I
move.
think these days it's maybe 250 or something like that. But back then,
That's
I
not
think it
bad.
was 120K. It wasn't a whole lot, but it was supposed to be like for 6 months, right? And then you raise around after, and
Yeah, but
yeah,
where
it
do you
was
live?
very
Because my
interesting.
problem with the YCs of the world is like they're expecting you to go live on a couch somewhere for the next 6 months because they're
Yeah,
not giving you enough money to like it's just so when I think about it at 55, I'm like, I can never do that, right? Like I'm an
yeah,
established human being with kids and stuff. But if I'm in my 20s and you're gonna hand me 100,000, I could live on a couch for 6 months with that.
yeah. No, for
Like
sure.
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
we are three dudes. We kind of shared a very small place, right? It's a very entrepreneurial kind of like thing that YC and all these accelerators kind of want you to do and want you to see, and investors want to hear that kind of story, right?
But you're not. I
Yeah,
mean, you're not. You're still young, I guess. I mean, but not terribly young. You're in your early 20s at this point, right?
yeah,
You're
yeah,
25, maybe 24, 25.
yeah. I think I was 25, 26, something like that. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, super exciting. What did your mom say? Hey, I'm moving to California. Let's
yeah.
get this gig.
Yeah, I guess she was a little skeptical of that, and
That's
you
what
know,
parents are. Yeah, parents
yeah,
are always.
it's a what helped though is so my now wife, back then girlfriend, I met her. She did an exchange semester in at the University of Mannheim in Germany, and she's from Florida though. So she went to University of Florida in Gainesville,
Yeah.
and
I'm from Miami, so I'm all familiar with.
oh, you're very familiar. Yeah, yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, and she is. We were always like visiting her family, and so I was like going back and forth for a couple of years at this point. she graduated and then moved to Germany with me again after she was 6 months back in Gainesville, and I was with her in Gainesville for a couple months as well, and then we decided, hey,
A long
let's live
distance
in
is
Germany for
tough,
a few
man. You made
months.
it work, especially if you had to go to Gainesville, dude. I mean,
Yeah,
come on now,
in
it's
the middle of the
Gainesville.
swamp.
I'm not a fan of that city per se. But
Oh, same. Yeah. I mean, I didn't know what I
um,
signed up for. I was there for like 3 months or so with her, and it's just like, yeah,
yeah,
it's high
we don't have to
humidity, but
spend.
like, you think like, okay, I'm gonna go to Florida with you for like 3 months, and then you think of like beach and things like, but you don't realize you're like landlocked in the middle of the swamp, right?
You're landlocked there, and it's very cookie cutter. A lot of people in a small area, and all really like it's not Europe, dude. Like
It's
I'm sure
not
you got
Europe at
bored.
all.
You
Yeah,
got
exactly.
bored in
Nothing
like
is
3 weeks.
walkable, really.
No, no, no.
I mean, there's worse cities in terms of walkability than Gainesville,
And
to be
and this
honest,
is
but yeah.
how we know that you really love your wife, because even though she was in Gainesville, you
Yeah.
stayed with her. What did she
Yeah.
study at UF, by the way?
She did classical studies, so totally different than I did. So she was I mean, I loved history when I was in high school, but she made it her studies.
Nice.
She learned like reading hieroglyphs in ancient Greek and
Wow,
that kind
that's
of stuff,
awesome.
right? Like she loves archaeology, and like it's a totally
Man,
different path than I'm on, right? And yeah, she became an English teacher when she moved to Germany with me, because that was obviously a great skill for her to have, native speaking, right? But there's not a lot of like archaeologists in Germany that don't fluently speak German, and obviously into German
yeah.
history. Ancient Greek's not going to help you much in Germany.
That's wild. I anytime I go to a museum and I see the Egyptian artifacts with all the writing, I always wish I could read it. And not that I did anything in my life to even learn it, right? Like, but if I had three wishes, one of them would be to read that Egyptian and
Yeah,
then
it's
go and because
fascinating.
it's fascinating, right? Somebody wrote that 3,000 years ago or something.
Yeah,
It's just
it's wild.
all right. So you're in California, you do this startup. How does that go, man? I guess it went well.
Yeah, initially actually it didn't. Yeah, we took on a little bit of capital before or at the beginning of Skydeck actually. So when demo day came around, we still had plenty of capital left to keep going for like another year or something like that. And we had the open source, but we just had launched a commercial offering. We were building a pass at the time, and as we all know, pass is a great business. Like, I don't think there've been any successful. Maybe after Heroku, right? I don't think there was any major passes out there that are truly successful. I mean, I know the Docker founders tried the same thing, right? And then they pivoted towards virtualization, which is kind of what we're doing. Pretty similar story, I guess. And I think we built this pass, and the demo day was coming around, but we only had a handful of users at the time. So we went to demo day, and one of our advisors, Sean, who runs Skydeck's fund, told us, "Hey, if you don't need the capital and if you're unsure if this is gonna actually be helpful to you, tell them you're not fundraising." And we were the only company at demo day that was on stage. So like we're actually not fundraising, but we'd love to, get to know you or something like that, right?
Dude,
And
that's
you
got to
won't.
look good in your favor. I don't need your money.
I know
Yeah.
exactly, and I had no idea, right? I was totally naive, but I think Sean knew that this was gonna trigger VCs. So we were the second most, like, companies get booked after demo day and stuff like that, and like who wants a meeting request and stuff like. We were the second most booked company, and we weren't even fundraising because everybody was like, they don't want our money. What the hell?
Yeah,
You
yeah, yeah.
know?
Yeah,
It's kind of
money's
like that.
expensive, and I don't want yours.
Yeah, there was one VC that even sent us a term sheet. Like they met with us, and I
Wow.
reiterated that we're not fundraising, and they thought it was like a game, right? They thought it was a tactic or something. So they sent us a term sheet via email afterwards, and I was like, "What the hell?" And at that point, I mean, we did have to consider it, right? And we looked into it, and I still decided not to take it, but
Yeah,
It's kind of wild, and I'm glad we didn't because ultimately that DevSpace and DevSpace Cloud, right, was the PaaS that we built on top of the open source. Wasn't a success, right? It was a failure story, and I think part of this was building a PaaS is really hard because effectively you're selling hosting, and you're when AWS is already there, and these kind of like AWS, Google, and Azure competing, then you're this small little side node. It's
super
really, really
small.
tough,
Yeah,
right? So we did have a decent user base and quite some load on our Kubernetes cluster. But and by the way, we actually moved off of that self-hosted infra pretty quickly after we had some actual usage and after we were in California, but the co-located server was in Frankfurt, right? Which wasn't quite as handy. So we were actually running on top of I think AWS or Google Cloud at the time, and yeah, one thing that we really learned though in that phase was how do we run Kubernetes as cheaply as possible because we had a lot of free tier users and nobody wanted to pay.
of
So as
course,
you said,
of
we were
course.
bleeding money, right? And we are kind of wondering how do bigger companies do that? Because don't they have like 10,000 engineers or 5,000
Yeah.
engineers,
Well,
and don't they
well,
all need Kubernetes, right?
Google has the black hole of the AdSense, right? Like they print
That's
money,
true.
right? You have
That's
one
true. They do
product that
print money.
prints money, and then you can spend the money anywhere you want. Like it's
Yeah, that is kind of
right.
true. Yeah.
I mean, it's just so I've seen this now a couple times where Fang comes in and they just take over the market because they can, right? Like you're saying, like we were on Heroku, and then eventually it wasn't scaling enough because we grew enough and we have to get off, right? And I loved Heroku. Or you start on Linode and you're getting your and then right, it doesn't work. So what I'm seeing now, it's going to be interesting. AI is super interesting right now. AI platforms because the history says that Fang is going to take this over. History says that they're going to make this so cheap that nobody will want to run it privately. But this is the first time I think that privacy is critically important and it might outweigh the cost, and that this is might be an industry platforms here might be an industry that Fang can't take over because people need to have that security that their data isn't going anywhere beyond maybe even their physical hardware.
Yeah, and I mean, with AI, there's also a lot of like governments who are, I think today, obviously looking at the political landscape, it's a different story. But in general, with AI, there's a lot of push for having localized data centers, right? And having models trained in the country that they're operating in, right? Um, and I think that is a different kind of challenge, right? Because there's always going to be data flow when you are with AWS, right? Like they may have obviously regions in your area, right? But you really trust this, kind of global company to not, transfer any data behind the scenes. Like I think people are very, very skeptical of that. And, there's obviously a bunch of new GPU kind of players. I think CoreWeave, obviously, a very, very popular one in the US, but when they're a customer of ours, we serve a whole bunch of CoreWeave of Indonesia, or CoreWeave of India, and stuff like that, which are using virtual clusters now to, because ultimately what they need to do is they need to hand out. A lot of them are built for Kubernetes because when you look at OpenAI's tech blog and stuff like that, a lot of things are built on Kubernetes. A lot of that inferencing and training happens on Kubernetes. What these GPU cloud providers need to do is they need to hand out Kubernetes clusters with GPUs attached. You can obviously rent out like entire GPUs and it's very expensive, right? And lock them into like 5-year contracts, right? But there's also this idea of sharing GPUs and having shared workloads, right? Because you have this peak during training and then you may actually not need it anymore, right? So a lot of these companies are looking into, vCluster
More
as a
security
technology
stuff
to do
though,
that.
right? Uh, More
Yeah, they
security
definitely
stuff.
need the node level security.
No,
It's
now
kind
it's
of
at the
fun to
hardware
work with
level,
them.
right? With caches
Yeah.
memory, and now my data is mixed with yours. We saw those things almost, what, 6, 7 years ago with some of the CPU
Yeah.
breaches.
Yeah, it's
I,
very
I
specific stuff, and I know some of these cloud providers they build their own technology like on that layer, right? Because it's a competitive edge for them, right? To do that, right? Because the more effectively you could share hardware, the better it is, right? And obviously the like Nvidia with fractioning and all these kinds of things, right? They're like pushing heavily in these directions as well, but it's still early days, right? And I think all
it's
of this
super early
GPU
days.
shortage kind of created that opportunity also for a lot of these smaller vendors to pop up, right? It's a, as you said, it's a special time in compute history where there is this kind of little window for people to start these localized companies again.
But I think your vCluster project is right where it needs to be, because I think we're going to see over the next half a decade people needing to at some level move away from the cloud for these really sensitive systems, or have some crazy way of guaranteeing that their compute is really isolated in some form or another. I don't know why it's with AI as opposed to anything else you've ever run in the cloud, but people are really paranoid with this AI stuff. Like, it's almost like they're finally using really private data to do things, and there's extra paranoia. But I think what's going to happen, and I don't know how long it's going to take, but the day you can run an LLM on this thing, disconnected from the internet, right, where it's good enough, that's when things stupidly explode, because that's when the robots can run and don't have to be connected to an internet to think. And I know they're working on that, right? That's so every time I see a news article that they were able to get a LLM based model smaller, using 8-bit and 4-bit, that's all my brain goes to. They're a little closer to wearables now. They're a little closer to wearables now. They're a little closer. That's now my stomach hurts. When this happens and it's not connected, right? Our glasses, everything now can start to do some crazy stuff.
Yeah, when your toaster runs AI at some point. I don't know exactly why the toaster would, but
That's when it gets scary. And everything else is just you connect when you want to do something a little bit more, but all the basics are now running on your watch. I don't know how long it's going to take to do it. I don't know. But every time I see a model that gets smaller and just as accurate, I'm like, they're a step closer.
yeah, I
Obviously, you
mean,
need
we've seen
GPUs.
DeepSeek, right, come out with, commodity hardware, like much cheaper to run, right? And that's already a step in the direction. So I think the race has definitely been kicked off in that direction.
Well, when you got to spend 40 grand on a H100, right? It's almost like Nvidia is trying to kill themselves. It's almost like, to me, that they see some year end where they're just gonna stockpile cash for the next 2, 3 years, and then they know the market's just gonna fall apart. But it ain't gonna matter because, right? They've put trillions of dollars away and whatever. And now walk away from it. I don't know. It's interesting. So what time? Okay, we're gonna talk for 10 more minutes here because I want to hear how you sort of at some point transition to the idea of vCluster. What did you see? Where were you? What did you see in the marketplace that you thought that this is what? Because based on our conversation when we started, I think it's exactly the product that these AI platforms are going to need, if not today, very, very soon.
Yeah, I mean, really, we were running desk-based cloud. We realized we need to pivot, right? And we are kind of wondering, okay, um, what is a thing that we could work on, or as I said, do we just get a job at Google now, right? Which is always kind of like the fallback option. But I think the learning that we had was it's really hard to do multi-tenancy in Kubernetes. It's really hard to share a large Kubernetes cluster because we were trying to do that for our customers, and it was a really big challenge, and it was very limiting for our tenants, right? What we had to put in place in order to make that possible and keep the costs down and keep the system operational. So we were kind of wondering how do other people do it, and we were a little smarter than when we started out. So instead of building things for like a year and a half and then going out, we were like, okay, why don't we? And we already knew open source, right? Because we were running this open source project for a couple of years at this point. I think like almost 2 years at that point. So we were like, okay, let's just open source something very lightweight and see if there's demand. And let's think carefully about if this piece would be something we can ultimately commercialize, right? Because we realized commercializing this developer experience PaaS layer is really, really tough today. And competing on hosting with the big guys is really tough. So we can't do that. It needs to be the value of the software, right? So we built this open source project called Kiosk. And the idea was, we called it a multi-tenancy extension for Kubernetes. It was a API server extension, which was something that people didn't really know about. Like people knew about CRDs and controllers, but it was still relatively new in Kubernetes as well. And then API server extensions, where you really write like virtual, resources in Kubernetes in a way. And we built this Kiosk project that allowed you to have constructs like tenant, and we called it a space, which is an abstract way to define a namespace, and it automated a lot of things for you. We put it out there, and it immediately got a lot of attention. And EKS put it in their best practices guide, I think 4 or 5 weeks after we open sourced it.
Wow.
And then we were like, okay, EKS doesn't know how to do multi-tenancy. That's why they pointed us, right? So that's a great sign that there is an opportunity here, right? So within 2 or 3 months, we were certain that there is an opportunity. And then we were like, if we were to solve this, what is the shortcomings? Because Kiosk was a prototype. It's a little bit of automation, right? It's a little bit of abstraction. Had a great user experience, but what are the shortcomings still? And realize the shortcoming is the Kubernetes API itself. If you don't dice up the cluster into this virtual layer and abstract away from the underlying cluster, you're never gonna achieve this. So, and we had this, we saw this project of Darren, which is, he's on a cap table, he's an advisor, he's meeting with my CTO, I think once a week or something like that, to talk about tech and where things are heading. He's a really great technologist. And, he built this project called K3V, and he called it virtualize K3S by putting it in a container. That's what he called it. And I think he went 1% of the way of building a virtual cluster. And we saw that as one, we obviously looked at everything out there. There was also the Kubernetes multi-tenancy group at the time that, the working group multi-tenancy, part of the SIG and Kubernetes, right? And they were working on something called virtual cluster. And we're like, we got to get into this virtual cluster game because that sounds really fascinating. And nobody has made it work yet, But that would really solve everything we're trying to do here. And it would, be a much, much better kiosk, essentially. So we started building it. We built it proprietary first. We found the first couple of design partners. And
what cache are you using to do this? Because this is months of your life.
Yeah.
So
We had some investors from the early phase of Skydeck. So we had one VC invest pretty early in the Skydeck journey, just kind of purely opportunistic round. And we raised the angel round as well as soon as we started working on the virtual cluster journey. And then we started pitching VCs for a proper seed round.
So you got clout at this point because people are investing in you at this point. You have some.
Yeah. No, it's definitely at that point, people understood what is a virtual cluster, where can we head with this, right? And we didn't open source it yet, right? We wanted to raise the seed round and then open source it because we knew as soon as we open source it, things will happen, and we need to be at the forefront of this, right? So I think we raised 2.6 million at the beginning of 21. And then we open sourced it literally a month later or something like that. And the first 3 or 4 months afterwards went really great. The adoption was great. We signed a Fortune 500 company super early on. and a bunch of others, we weren't really focused on commercialization, and we didn't really have a pricing model that was great. We charged per user, which didn't really make sense because you needed just a few admins, right? We sold 50 user licenses, just kind of, we didn't
Yeah,
really care
pricing
about
is
this.
hard. Dude. We can have a whole show on pricing.
Yeah, it's
Pricing's
hard in the early days. But the fact that there was a Fortune 500 company that said like, okay, for 30K, we believe in this technology, it's valuable, and maybe they actually saw that the pricing model was very advantageous for them down the road if this works. That's kind of the starting point. And then our VCs realized that, and 3 or 4 months in, one of the VCs was like, "Hey, we want to double down on you guys. We want to put in another like 2 million."
without a proper pricing plan. Like that is amazing to me.
Yeah, I mean, they saw the
Unless,
opportunity, right? They
uh,
saw the traction, and that's the great thing about open source as well. It spreads really quickly if you do it right.
well, so you see, now I want to ask you: are you looking at this as I'll just use a lifestyle business where you really want to run this for the next 10 years? Or are you looking at it as when IBM decides that they want it, just like they just bought HashiCorp, right? Like they're going to add this to their sort of offerings because this kind of could complement like the stuff that IBM or
Yeah.
VMware has been buying for the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, yeah. We had 3 acquisition offers already at this point.
Okay.
We said no to everybody. It was from like two cloud providers, not tier one cloud providers, but two pretty, like you'd know them for sure.
Yeah. That's got to be
And
hard, dude. If somebody wants to offer me a large amount of money, I'm like, fine, I'll work on something else here. Professional, right?
yeah,
I think
I think
about it
our
with
customers
Ardan all the
actually
time.
appreciate that we're kind of pulling through with, and I mean, look, it's the probabilities speak against being independent forever, right? But that doesn't mean we can't try, right?
No, but I always, when people come to me and they say they want to start a business, I'm always, the first question, not one of the first questions is, are you looking to sell quickly or are you looking to create a business that you really want to run, or at least it runs for the next 10 years? Like Arden is a service company. We're running it. We've run it out now for 12 years. If somebody came in and wanted to offer me 3 or 4 times revenue, I'd sell it tomorrow just because I've been doing this for a decade. Right? I'd like to maybe focus on something else. But my business partner's like, why would you ever do that, Bill? If we do this right, this thing will just run and we'll have other people manage it. So that's why I always ask the question, because I think the mentality of, and it could change overnight, but I think how you structure things and how you attack and go after things early on would dictate the answer to that question, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think once you're on that venture capital path, right, um, you're definitely setting yourself up for. I mean, it depends, right? Definitely, if things don't go so well, I assume VCs are also going to be like, hey, should we look at some acquisition partners, right? And then they're going to probably
Yeah.
proactively encouraging you to look into this. But when things are doing great, I don't think anybody really is looking in that direction, because that's why you're taking on this capital, right? Is that you can build this generational company if, ideally, right? um, and yeah, maybe it's a little bit of ignorance again of me to say, hey, we may have a shot at this and let's try, right? um, and maybe I'll feel differently in 2 years from now, but I think for now I do see we're building something pretty fundamental for a whole bunch of areas, right? Like Fortune 500 companies need to hand out Kubernetes clusters to their engineering teams. You mentioned the GPU cloud providers where we're playing an interesting role, right? And now we're launching the snapshot feature that we talked about, about an hour ago or so.
I think
And
that's going to be
there's so much
huge.
potential, right?
I think there's a market there right now that doesn't exist. I know there's some tooling out there, but if you could solve that problem in a really simple way, where I could just have a single artifact, and dude, that's like mind blowing. You could pull that off. Like,
Yeah, the opportunities are endless, and I'm just kind of curious to explore all of this, right? I've even seen people use it as e-learning environments or to do workshops and stuff. It was kind of funny when one of the earlier KubeCons, we went to we met some people at the VMware booth who were pretty technical, and I think they were like doing trainings with Tanzu and stuff like that, right? And we wanted to check out like one of the new things that they shipped, and they ran all the demos on vCluster at their booth. And we had this crappy little booth in the background. They had this ginormous booth in the front, and we didn't have a demo station or anything, right? We pulled up the laptop real quick here and there, but there wasn't a lot of room at this tiny booth. So when people asked for a demo, we told them go to the VMware booth. Just ask them to spin up any Kubernetes cloud native software they're going to do with vCluster. You're going to see the power of vCluster right there. And
You're
that's
on.
something we haven't even thought about, right?
So for the longest time, I saw companies making more money than Docker. And it got me super nervous because these companies were building on a tech that obviously is not going away. But at the same time, if the company that you're relying on isn't making money and or you're making more, I feel like you're building on sand a little bit, right? And your story just made me get a sense of that, right? Like this company is demoing and building on top of your tech and they're bigger than you. And like
100%.
I at some level, again, sometimes I think age, because I'm not going to be right. You're kind of building on sand unless you decide to solidify sort of that tech that you're building on.
Yeah, it's a cautionary tale, right? Like Docker, in my opinion, is really a cautionary tale, and to some extent, even like Terraform, right? I'm not saying HashiCorp as a whole, but like even the Terraform story, where they didn't commercialize that for a long amount of time, and then others did, and they were almost late to the game, right, with their own tech, but they've done all the core innovations in it, and then they had to relicense because I think they saw themselves forced to do that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Those stories are really unfortunate. For us, we're very intentional about what is open source and what is proprietary. We are not just selling support, for example. Very strict about that. We don't do professional services and support. We partner with folks who do that, right? But we're focusing on the core tech, and we're splitting very clearly what goes in the commercial version, what goes in the enterprise version. And it's great when people are able to do great things with vCluster. Sometimes we're hearing, hey, we run 300 vClusters in production already. And we're like, oh my gosh, that's insane, right? You're doing that with the open source. And they're like, yeah, and it's kind of like problematic now because, the open source, the standard backing store is the SQLite database. And then they come to us and say like, yeah, we're seeing these like slow response times. And,
Yeah,
and
no
I'm like, yeah,
kidding.
no,
No
no
kidding.
wonder, right? But that's great, right? Like that, I think that's the beauty of it. They can run, they can explore, they can really get familiar with the tech. And then they knock on our door and they're essentially like, okay, we need to talk about how we're solving this particular problem with our biggest V cluster.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that's a great
That's
conversation to
awesome.
have.
Okay, last question because we're really like at the edge of time here. I love asking entrepreneurs this question. Uh, from a business perspective, what's keeping you up at night?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, in the past couple of months, it was really building the leadership team. I brought in a marketing leader, I brought in a VP of sales, right? Like really building out those non-engineering type function, non-product functions, right? The go-to-market side of things. Um, and I think right now it's really around where else are we taking the product and what other areas do we need to double down in, right? Like that's the big question for me. I mean, we launched snapshots, right? But there's like a bunch of other areas now where we're like, okay, where do we invest? Because obviously we're still, like, I mean, we raised a bunch of capital, but we are still constrained in what we can do. We can't do 50 things all at once. We have to prioritize and, put our eggs in the right basket, hopefully. So those are one of the key questions that usually are on my mind.
All right, we're totally out of time. Thank you for talking to us as long as you did. I couldn't cut it short. I had to do the extra half an hour with you, man. It was too cool. Plus, I don't get to meet a lot of people that know Go and kind of in this space too. We're
We could have
a
gone
little
some deeper
exposed.
on Go. We'll save that for when we meet at a conference or something at one point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. If anybody, we'll put this in the show notes, but if anybody wanted to reach out to you, had a question or something, what's the best way for people to reach out?
super approachable, right? Like just hit me up on LinkedIn. You'll find me obviously on all the other platforms as well. I think one of the best ways to actually reach out is also join our community Slack channel. It's linked on the vCluster website, on the Loft Labs company website, pretty much anywhere you'll find that Slack channel. And yeah, just join there, send me a DM, right? And yeah, that's usually the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Brilliant. Okay, this is Bill Kennedy and Lukas Gentele signing off from the On Labs podcast, and we both hope to see everybody again real soon.